Hey guys, welcome to another discussion video of a superhero animated television series. Today I'm here to talk about the Season 1 episode of Batman Beyond titled Blackout. If you haven't seen the episode, I am going to be spoiling all kinds of things about it as I summarize the plot before I get into the actual review. And if you have seen this episode, but it's been a while, maybe this will be your chance to refresh your memory on the events of the episode. We are introduced to Inc., a corporate saboteur working for Derek Powers, who we met in the two-part pilot. Inc. is sabotaging Foxtecca, a rival company for Powers, because both are trying to secure a contract to build a satellite for the government. Terry has a few encounters with Inc., and when Powers finds out about it, he changes Inc.'s mission, sending her to kill Terry and whoever is helping Terry, because Inc. heard Terry talking to Bruce over his comlink. Inc. hitches a ride on the new and improved Batmobile, and Bruce and Terry have to work together to not only stop Inc. from killing them, but also figure out who they are. The episode ends with Batman leaving Inc. for Commissioner Barbara Gordon. Cue credits. There's actually quite a bit about this episode that I really dig. For a show that I know for a fact was very much built around standalone episodes with very little continuity between episodes, I was surprised to see some direct callbacks to what had happened in the previous episodes. For one, Powers and Dana both mention how Terry's dad recently passed away, and Terry and Bruce both act like this is still a very new thing for Terry. And as I mentioned, we actually get to see Barbara Gordon, who we only heard a spoken reference to in Rebirth. These are all very nice touches in my humble. Another cartoon would have gone from the pilot to this episode and pretended like none of the events from the first episode had even happened other than setting up the series. That's not even a diss against shows with little continuity. If you look at Batman the Animated Series, in at least the first couple of DVD box sets, you can watch those episodes completely out of order and it wouldn't really affect the way that the story is told. I personally prefer when there's some references to what came before, but not to the point of needing to see the previous episode just to understand what is going on. And I think this episode hits that sweet spot just perfectly, which I was surprised to see. Just from what I remembered of this series, I figured it would be more like what Batman the Animated Series was doing around this time. One thing I'll be focusing on quite a bit in this series of reviews is how well the people behind this show handle giving Terry his very own rogues gallery. If you have access to the DVDs, one thing these guys mention a few times in the commentary is that they didn't want to just do futuristic versions of the Penguin or the Riddler, etc., which is a laudable goal if I do say so myself. It does mean that these guys had to do a lot more work in terms of creation, though. With Batman the Animated Series, they had characters like Two-Face, the Joker, and Catwoman who had been around in the comics for 50 years, and so they knew generally what aspects of the characters worked and what didn't because they could look at 50 years of trial and error from the comics. But with Batman Beyond, they had to do all the legwork themselves, and so that's why some villains like Inc., the Royal Flush Gang, and Derek Powers work quite well, but others like Stalker, Spellbinder, and Shriek don't work nearly as well, at least in terms of an ongoing series where you want your villains to have a sense of longevity and be viable enough to be used in multiple episodes. And Inc. works very well as a character, I think. We don't know a whole heck of a lot about her at this point, but you can't expect them to delve into her entire backstory this early in the series, especially when this episode is already doing so much, like continuing to establish Terry's girlfriend, his life as a teenager in general, Bruce's antagonistic relationship with Powers, Powers' very loose relationship with Law and Order, etc. When an episode is working all of that into the story, it's understandable if Inc. is still a bit of a mystery to us. But we get what information we need, which is that Inc. is for hire, and she is not a threat to be taken lightly. That does quite a bit for this series, really. Bruce Wayne is always seen as this sort of Superman, not to be confused with the Superman, and if you ask who would win in a fight between Batman and Galactus, someone out there is definitely going to find a way to say that Batman would win. But Terry is clearly not that good. Every time he fights Inc., he loses in an embarrassing fashion. It actually takes Bruce's help to win, which is great because it shows that Bruce is not as decrepit as we thought he was in Rebirth, and also Inc. is not crazy. Most of Bruce's enemies were completely bonkers out of their mind, the big exception being Catwoman, at least from the animated series. And that's another way that Terry's world differs from Bruce's, in that he doesn't really have any twisted, crazy villains. Most of his foes are somehow tied to the corporate world, which could get old after a while, but for now I like it. It's a new spin on the Batman mythos, and it works. I wouldn't want Terry's opponents to be psycho just like Bruce's, because it would feel too much like the guys making the show were trying to make just a clone of Batman the Animated Series. The only other thing that I wanted to say is about Terry's main squeeze, Dana. Boy, she is really the worst. I never used to hate her when I was a kid, and even when I was in high school buying the DVDs for this show, I never hated her then. It's only been in the last year or so that I really came to despise her presence in this series. I think it all goes back to how little continuity happens in this show. If this was a show that was more willing to have ongoing subplots and stories running through multiple episodes, then I think Dana would have more of a chance to develop into a real character. But as is, in the show that we got, Dana is just the girlfriend, and she doesn't have that much of a personality beyond, "Golly, Terry, I wish you would spend more time with me." It gets much worse later in the series, but you can see it beginning to happen here. In almost a single breath, she goes from consoling Terry, telling him that it must be hard that his dad died, to this snooty harumph as her head sharply turns away from Terry because Bruce has called him into work. It'd be one thing if this lady had, like, an ounce of compassion or something, like, "Hey, you've been in school for 7 hours and then you worked for him this afternoon. You need a break, Terry." But no, this scene plays it like she's upset that he's not there spending time with her. In many ways, Dana reminds me of Lana Lang from Smallville. Granted, Lana did have slightly more development, but Smallville also lasted a lot longer than Batman Beyond, and each episode was twice as long as any episode of Batman Beyond. But I think I despise both characters about equally, and like I say, if this series had been slightly more serial, I think Dana would have quickly gotten beyond just being the nagging girlfriend, but sadly she never did. And I should point out that the creators of this series seem to be aware of her role in the series, or rather, her lack of having a good role in this series. I believe Bruce Timm or Alan Burnett also thought that she was just limited to being a nagging girlfriend, and not much more beyond that. So I'm not alone here, but hopefully her presence in this series isn't going to drive me insane as I continue reviewing this series. So what did you guys think of this episode? Is this series heading in the right direction, or down the dark and irredeemable path? Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below, as well as my review. If you disapprove of anything I said here, just tell me and I'll try my best to improve my channel in the future based on your feedback. Also, if you like this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. If you did like this video, next week I'll be tackling an episode of Batman the Animated Series, and the week after that I'll be doing another episode of Batman Beyond, so be on the lookout for those. And be sure to check in throughout the week to see some of my other videos that I'll be putting up. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.